So we'll see what happens. We can also add an addition on, so we can start the printing now and maybe do an addendum after we get a positive decision. So we're working on a lot of things, including an executive order.
Over the holiday weekend, the president and members of his administration reiterated plans to move forward with the citizenship question on the 2020 census. Last month, the Supreme Court ruled that such a question is constitutional, but called the administration's justification, quote, inadequate.
Despite the Commerce Department's announcement that the question had been scrapped, the administration now appears to still be moving forward with plans to have it on census forms. Joining us now with legal analysis is former federal prosecutor Joseph Moreno. He also served as special United States attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia. Always great to see you, sir.
Good to be here.
Got a nice little tan going. Hopefully it was a good weekend. What's going on? What's happening here?
In my professional legal opinion,
yes.
This is a mess.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
This was mishandled from the get-go. This should not have been a very controversial effort, really. I mean, despite the fact that obviously these days immigration, citizenship are sensitive issues, the question about citizenship has been included in the census in the past, both in the census that goes to everyone, as well as to targeted individuals in sort of community annual and biannual census. But at the end of the day, the way it was generated, the way it was argued before the court, the way now is effectively, we thought it was a done issue, and then it was resuscitated by a presidential tweet. And now we learned this morning that the Department of Justice has basically scrambled the whole team of lawyers and set a whole new team on this matter. It's a mess. I don't see it getting any better. I think it's going to grind away in the courts, but ultimately, the Supreme Court will have the final word, and I think we've heard from them already. It's not going to happen.
Well, that's very interesting. And I couldn't agree with you more. What enrages me the most about this is that procedurally, they were absolutely right on the merits. All they had to do was provide a justification and write through the Administration Procedures Act, and they were good to go. Yeah. And yet, for some reason, they're completely inept and not able to do like the most basic task in publishing something to the census. But I do want to get to that point in particular, which is why is SCOTUS most likely not going to uphold this, even if they do try to provide a new justification?
You've got effectively three camps, right, in the Supreme Court a few weeks ago, right? You had the conservatives that said, we are okay with the justification for including the citizenship question. You had the four liberals who said, no, we think this is arbitrary and capricious, and regardless of whether the process was done properly, we're going to reject this out of hand.
Right.
And it was really the Chief Justice who said, to your point, on the merits, it's okay to have a citizenship question, but I need to know the justification for doing it, and I'm not happy with the explanation I've been given. So it leaves the door open. The problem is this has been going on for months, and so the idea that at the 11th hour now, past the publishing deadline of June 30th, which has come and gone, they're going to sort of now create a new justification that's going to withstand scrutiny. I'm skeptical. I mean, I don't know if it hasn't worked to this point. How are they going to go before these same justices and says, well, that was the reason before. Now we have a new reason. It's going to be subject to all the same kinds of attacks at the various levels of the judiciary. It's going to be a big uphill battle.
Well, and you can't take back the things that were said in the past about the actual justification, right?
It makes you lose credibility with the judges, whether it's at the district court on remand or at the Supreme Court when it goes back there. That and the deadline, too. When you go to court and say, Your Honor, we need to get this decided because June 30th is the deadline to start printing the census, and then the deadline comes and goes and says, yeah, actually, that wasn't such a big deal. We can still argue it. Again, you lose credibility. And so it wasn't the merits this time. It was the process, and it was really, really botched.
Just idiocracy. I've said that before here. But I also want to know give us the insight into the firing, or not the firing, but the removal of the entire judicial team behind this. The read from the New York Times and others was that many of these career lawyers said, we're done with this, we're not signing our name to whatever you're going to put before the justices now.
It's a very good possibility. I mean, these are non-political, apolitical men and women. They're really good at what they do. And again, if the process was botched, my criticism is really from the White House and from the Secretary of Commerce level, not from the career lawyers at the Justice Department. So yes, it's a very good
cleanup.
Yeah, they did the best they could.
They're probably trying to mop up. They're dealing. I mean, remember, we learned last week that the lead DOJ lawyer learned about the department's change in strategy from the judge who learned about it from the president's tweet saying, we're back on again. I mean, that's just not the way to run a government. And so, again, reasonable people can agree or disagree on whether this question should be there. That's a perfectly fine question open to debate. But when you ruin the process, when you make yourself so that you give judges almost no choice but to turn you down, well then, you've really taken a big step backwards.
So what options does the president have? Because part of what you're pointing to is there is a legally mandated timeline here by which time the census forms have to be done and printed and out.
I'm not sure it's legally mandated, but it's definitely a practical limitation. They've said, look, we're not going to get these to the people in time if we don't start printing. And that was last week, presumably, allegedly. So I don't really know what they're going to do now. If they can sort of slow roll the printing as they kind of work out this issue, if they can do targeted questions where maybe only a subset of the population get the citizenship question if it is ultimately allowed by the courts. But, again, I almost have to wonder if the president likes keeping this argument in the public debate, but ultimately he's going to be bound by what the courts say.
I mean, it's kind of an esoteric argument for
Yeah, it is, but he really has taken over our national politics. I really am curious about the executive order part of this. How does he even have the authority in order to force that? Is there any avenue through that in the Administration Procedure Act?
I don't see it. I mean, it seems to me that an executive order is subject to the same judicial review and the same threat of an injunction that if you're doing it through the normal course. So I think if the president decided to issue an executive order ordering Secretary of Commerce to include this question, the plaintiffs would run back to the district court in New York, in Maryland, in California. They would get an injunction from one or all three, and we'd be back where in the same place. So I think it's sort of an idle threat. I don't see it really changing the legal dynamic of anything.
To your point, it might be just a political move to show they at least did everything they possibly could in order to
liberal
get it
judges,
done.
et cetera, et cetera.
Right, yeah. Even though it's their own idiocy that causes this.
Clearly.
Yeah.
Joe, thank you. Great to see you.
Thanks,
Great
Joe.
to be here. Thanks.
Today, President Trump plans to give a speech centered around his environmental leadership. Despite his cutting scores of environmental regulations, he plans to promote his administration's efforts toward clean air and water.
In an exclusive interview with Hill TV's John Solomon, Oleg Deripaska, founder of one of Russia's largest industrial groups with interests in aluminum and energy, talks climate change as rising continues.